You know the image. The lone warrior, standing in the moonlight. He draws a blade so sharp it can slice through a falling silk scarf, cut an armor-piercing bullet in half, and probably chop a tank into neat little sushi rolls. Thanks to Hollywood, anime, and video games, the Japanese katana has achieved a mythological status unrivaled by any other weapon in history. It is often hailed as the ultimate, flawless, indestructible masterpiece of warfare. But as our feline historical guide will tell you, pop culture is lying to you. Don't get me wrong, the katana is a beautiful, deadly weapon. But on the brutal, muddy battlefields of feudal Japan, it was rarely a warrior's first choice. To understand why, we have to look at the ground beneath their feet. Japan is incredibly beautiful, but geographically, it was cursed with terrible iron ore. They didn't have massive, rich iron mines like Europe or the Middle East. Instead, they had to scrape setetsu, or iron sand, out of riverbeds. This iron sand was full of impurities and had very low carbon content. If you tried to forge a sword straight out of this dirt, it would shatter on the first strike. So, Japanese smiths had to innovate, creating a massive clay furnace called the tatara. They would burn the iron, sand, and charcoal for 3 days and 3 nights straight, without sleep, just to create a usable lump of steel. This laborious process produced a bloom of steel called tamahage. But even then, the metal was incredibly uneven. This brings us to the most famous myth of all, the folding. You've heard it said that a katana is folded 1,000,000 times to make it magically strong. In reality, a smith usually folded the steel around a dozen times. And they didn't do it to make a lightsaber. They did it to evenly distribute the carbon and hammer out the massive amount of impurities like slag and sulfur, left over from the poor quality iron sand. Folding wasn't magic, it was damage control. Furthermore, to make the blade sharp but not entirely brittle, they used differential hardening. They coated the spine with thick clay and the edge with thin clay, then quenched it in water. The edge cooled instantly, becoming incredibly hard and sharp, while the spine cooled slower, remaining flexible. This process gave the katana its beautiful, iconic curve and the wavy Hammond line. But this design had a fatal flaw. While the edge could cut through unarmored flesh with terrifying ease, it was brittle. If a samurai struck a solid piece of iron armor or another weapon at the wrong angle, the katana could easily chip, bend, or even snap. You simply could not bash it against plate armor like a European longsword. If the sword was prone to bending and chipping, what did the samurai actually use? Let's rewind to the early days, around the 12th century. If you called a warrior a swordsman back then, they might have been insulted. The original samurai were elite, mounted archers. Their discipline wasn't called the way of the sword. It was called Kyuba no Michi, the way of the horse and bow. Their primary weapon was the yumi, a massive, asymmetrical longbow that was over 2 meters tall. The bow was so large that the grip had to be placed lower down, just so it could be fired from horseback. These elite warriors would ride in, shower the enemy with armor-piercing arrows, and ride out. Their iconic, boxy armor, the oyuroi, was specifically designed, with large shoulder guards to act as mobile shields against incoming arrows. The sword, usually a longer blade called a tachi at this time, was only drawn if they were knocked off their horse, ran out of arrows, or needed to take the head of a defeated enemy as a trophy. In the grand calculus of ancient warfare, range always dictates survival. Why get close enough to risk taking a blade to the ribs when you can eliminate your enemy from 50 paces away? As history progressed into the Sengoku Jidai, the bloody age of warring states in the 15th and 16th centuries, armies grew massively. Battles were no longer small, isolated skirmishes between a handful of elite mounted archers showing off their individual skills. Warlords began fielding vast armies of conscripted foot soldiers, known as a shigeru, pulled straight from the rice paddies. And you certainly don't equip thousands of untrained peasant soldiers with expensive, delicate, and meticulously custom-forged katanas. Instead, you hand them the undisputed, practical king of the battlefield, the long, pointy stick known as the yari, or spear. The mathematics of war are brutally simple, and it all comes down to the undeniable advantage of reach. A standard katana is about 1 meter long. A yari spear, on the other hand, can easily be 3 to 5 meters long. If a guy with a sword tries to attack a guy with a 4-meter spear, the swordsman is kept miles away, completely unable to strike. Furthermore, to maximize their defensive power on the battlefield, these massive armies fought in incredibly tight, dense infantry formations. If you're packed shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of other soldiers, there's literally no room to draw a long sword and swing it without accidentally hitting your best buddy in the face with a pommel. It's just bad tactics. The long spear allowed these packed formations to present an impenetrable, bristling wall of sharp points, much like the ancient Macedonian phalanx. For close-quarters shock combat to break these lines, elite warriors preferred the naginata, a long polearm with a sweeping curved blade, or even massive heavy iron clubs like the kanabo, which could brutally smash through metal armor without worrying about edge alignment. In the grand scheme of this chaotic battlefield, the legendary katana was essentially just a backup weapon. For centuries, the dominance of the bow and the spear was practically unchallenged across the bloody battlefields of feudal Japan. They were the ultimate weapons. That all changed suddenly in the year 1543. According to historical records, a massive, violent typhoon swept across the ocean, disrupting trade routes. During this storm, a Chinese merchant ship carrying mysterious Portuguese sailors was blown terribly off course, lost at sea. They eventually washed ashore and landed safely on the southern Japanese island of Tanegashima, bringing with them a completely foreign culture. But more importantly, they brought with them an incredibly exotic, terrifying device that would permanently change Japanese warfare forever. It was the matchlock musket, a weapon that utilized explosive black powder to launch a lead projectile at deadly, supersonic speeds. The local Japanese lord was so absolutely fascinated by this booming, smoke-belching metal tube that he demanded to own them. He reportedly bought 2 of these Portuguese muskets for an absolute fortune in gold, seeing their massive military potential. He then immediately ordered his absolute best, most skilled master swordsmiths to take the weapons apart and completely reverse engineer them. It was a huge metallurgical challenge, but they successfully copied the firing mechanism. Soon, factories across Japan were churning them out. These domestically produced firearms became known simply as Tanegashimas, and this new musket had a brutal, undeniable advantage over traditional weapons. You see, it took a literal lifetime of rigorous, exhausting physical training to master the giant Yumi bow or become a highly skilled samurai. But a simple, uneducated peasant farmer, freshly pulled straight from a muddy rice paddy with 0 prior military experience, could be easily taught to load the powder, aim the barrel, and reliably fire a matchlock musket in just a few short weeks of basic drilling. Furthermore, that small lead projectile could punch a hole clean through traditional samurai armor, rendering centuries of defensive craftsmanship completely obsolete overnight. The ultimate proof of this paradigm shift came in 1575 at the Battle of Nagashino. The brilliant and ruthless warlord Oda Nobunaga faced the Takeda clan, who boasted the most feared and legendary cavalry charge in all of Japan. In the old days, a cavalry charge would easily shatter enemy infantry lines like bowling pins. But Nobunaga was a visionary. He built staggered wooden palisades across the battlefield to protect his men, and deployed 3,000 Ashigaru troops, all armed with matchlock muskets, behind the fences. The problem was, matchlocks took forever to reload. Instead of firing all at once and being left completely vulnerable for a full minute, Nobunaga organized them into rotating ranks. One rank fired, stepped back to reload, and the next rank stepped up immediately. It was a continuous, devastating volley of lead that never stopped raining down. The Takeda samurai charged bravely, but they were slaughtered. The legendary armor and razor-sharp swords meant absolutely nothing against a wall of bullets. It was a massacre that shattered the old ways of war forever. Following this, armor designs rapidly changed. Suits of armor became much thicker, made of solid iron plates, specifically tested against bullets, with the dents left on purpose to prove their stopping power. The battlefield was now ruled by gunpowder and ash. So if the bow, the spear, and the gun did all the heavy lifting, what exactly was the katana doing all this time? The easiest way to understand the katana is to compare it to a modern soldier's pistol. Today, a soldier's primary weapon is their assault rifle. The pistol is a backup sidearm, drawn only in emergencies, when the rifle jams, or when fighting in extremely tight indoor spaces. The katana served the exact same role. It was the weapon a samurai fell back on when his spear broke, when he ran out of arrows, or when his horse was killed. It was his last line of defense in the chaos of war. It was also highly effective in urban skirmishes or castle raids, where long polearms were too clumsy to use in narrow corridors. Try swinging a 5-meter spear in a hallway. More importantly, it was an everyday carry item. You couldn't exactly walk into a tea house or attend a formal meeting carrying a 4-meter spear or a smoking musket. That would be awkward. But you could wear a katana tucked neatly into your obi belt. It was a constant companion, always ready for self-defense in a chaotic and unpredictable world. Over time, the sword began to change from a simple tool of war into a symbol of status and rank. It became known as the soul of the samurai, a physical manifestation of their spirit and honor. As the long wars ended and peace settled over Japan, the myth of the ultimate weapon was just beginning to be born. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu unified Japan, ushering in the Edo period, 2.5 centuries of relative peace. The massive armies were disbanded. Without wars to fight, armor, spears, and guns were locked away in armories. Samurai went from being frontline warriors to bureaucrats, administrators, and politicians. In 1588, a law called the sword hunt had already stripped commoners of their weapons. Wearing the long sword became the exclusive, legal right of the samurai class. It was the ultimate status symbol. It was the physical proof of their nobility. No sword, no status. It was as simple as that. During this long peace, martial arts shifted from practical battlefield survival to philosophical and spiritual pursuits. Elaborate etiquette, rituals, and myths were constructed around it. Cleaning the blade became a sacred act. The sword was romanticized as the soul of the samurai. It was no longer just a weapon, but a legend. The katana is indeed a triumph of metallurgical art, a masterpiece forged from terrible materials by brilliant craftsmen. But it is important to separate the art from the anime. Respect the sword for what it was, a beautiful sidearm, not a magical superweapon. It was a secondary tool in a much larger and more complex world of warfare. Wait, what? You mean I can't slice a mountain in half? Oh well, at least I still look cool. If you enjoyed slicing through these myths, don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical truth bombs. See you in the next chapter of history. Stay curious, my friends.